as the sun begins to rise in the night of the vigil of Pentecost, one cannot but think of the power of our God over the universe. God is unchanged, and therefore his eternal, internal life, the interiority of the Trinity, is always relationship and circumcision of love. All that exists, therefore, is in that context. We come from a current of love, are carried upon it, and are destined to return to it. The Lord, in returning to the Father, gave a complete promise that a person, not a thing, not just a force, would take his place, really. And there is a change in the before and after when one looks at the behavior of the disciples, even after the resurrection and after Pentecost. They are empowered. They no longer look at the human. Humanly speaking, it was impossible that these 11 and eventually 12 could conquer the world. But one man and God is a majority. We know from the experience of missionaries all over the centuries that in the first wave of evangelization, the Spirit of God is very powerful and miracles take place, and they are an important factor in the spread of the gospel when there are very little things to fall back on humanly and the odds are against us. I have been witness myself of the power of the Spirit in the renewal in France. Talking, however, to one or the other who are aware of things, one does pick up that the demon very easily finds a way to deviate and to mess up the work of the Spirit. There are good communities who came out of the renewal who have remained peaceful and have been greatly blessed. One thinks of Le Chemin Neuf, which has, strangely enough, taken on a number of old monasteries and is still doing well. Unfortunately, there have been hiccups here and there in other communities. One has to be aware that it does not mean that the Lord has not been at work, but one has to be aware that the enemy of God is very much at work where the Spirit of God wants to be at work. And therefore discernment is an important gift of the Spirit, wisdom and prudence. And the Spirit of God is a spirit of peace. The list that St. Paul gives us today in the second reading counterbalances the bad effects of the spirit of the demon. Our God is a God of peace and joy, concord and harmony. And it is in an interiority corresponding to that that the Spirit of God is free to act, not necessarily in the noisy. And therefore we must be aware that we can mistake true renewal for its counterfeit. The happy-clappy can be very human. The profoundly beautiful and challenging, can be more demanding, but far more authentic. Where there is true beauty, there is already an access to God, insofar as it is His language. Order and beauty are to be found there where there is true worship, and the action of the Spirit is greatly favoured by it. What of the situation of the work of the Spirit outside the visible parameters of the sacramental life, the Catholic faith and life and practice? If God is God of all, then He is concerned for all, and He is concerned very much for the salvation of all. And so what will He do? He will seek out a spot where He can operate and get through. And for vast numbers of souls, the issue has not been that of dogmatic fullness, but just of inherited faith. And so in that context, there is not the same responsibility as there might be for a Catholic who would leave the fullness of truth. And so the Spirit of God is generous and will bless there where He finds good will, because He wishes to save. And where there is truth according to what the soul sees, there surely there is a worship which is not displeasing to the one that it's offered to. And so we can see that God is free to bless, perhaps more fully than that of hypocritical praise. We have to be careful, because we can fall back on the sacramental system ourselves and even use it for our own glory. One thinks of, for instance, the plethora of ministries which have come in, which perhaps can be used to gratify individuals without asking whether actually the will of God, positively expressed, is truly being executed. And therefore worship, if it's not in obedience, is not fully worship. The word means worth-ship, the creature recognizing the worth of its creator. And if there is disobedience in the very act, then there is no longer total handling on of the will. So we need to be not too presumptuous when it comes to recognizing the work of the Spirit outside the parameters, because, let's face it, there is much sincere worship around the globe. Therefore, the Spirit will act there where He will find it. And therefore, in our own experience in Wales, when the Catholic Church was essentially absent for centuries, there the Spirit of God was moving. And many other testimonies that have come down, I've heard them myself. It was amazing what would happen in these waves of renewal. The revivals, when the chapels were full, and when beauty was something celestial, angelic, the singing, the preaching. People were not looking at their watches. They could not close the chapels all night. It was something else. And it had also an effect on society. The police had nothing to do. And so what would they do? They would go into the chapels where the people were, not to police them, but they would produce their own police choirs. And there they were, in the chapel themselves. It was an amazing situation. Conscience money would return years later to shops and firms. It was a cleaning up. Prayer was in the air. And then, of course, the war. And they didn't come back. But they went in grace. With regard to ourselves, the Spirit is free to act where He finds an open door and an expectant heart, which is handing over to Him the reins of authority. That's why we need to ask, who is in control? The Spirit of the Lord has filled the whole earth. This day is a day to ask, what favours his work? The Spirit prefers a peaceful heart and not an exteriorized praise. Anything exterior, if it's authentic, has to be an expression of the interior. So we start there. And the true celebrant of praise starts there. There is a big difference between the team and the clergyman who starts in mode of waiting and watching, and that starts with the planning of what is spectacular. One is from God, the other is from man. God needs to be the centre of attention, and he is always generous. Good is diffuse of itself, and if we only knew the package of gifts that God has for us, we would calm down and let him